Welcome to Trifecta Collective, Finding the Root, where we dive deep into understanding and addressing root causes of chronic health issues so you can help and find healing inside and out, now and forever. Hello, and welcome to Trifecta Collective, Finding the Root. I'm Megan Abbott, owner and founder of the holistic health practice Trifecta Collective. Welcome to the podcast. So today I want to talk about anxiety, which is such a big topic. And if you want a part two and want me to dig deeper into some of the overarching topics I'm going to talk about today, if I'm going to talk about certainly like tools, solutions, some things to try when it comes to anxiety, please let me know because I can absolutely go deeper into any of these that I'm going to talk about. And I really wanted to give a little bit more of an overarching holistic look at anxiety, where anxiety can really come from, how many of us may end up with anxiety, some different ways that maybe even anxiety can look like and feel like, and really where Western medicine obviously drops the ball when it comes to anxiety. And if you don't know this about me, if you know me, if you know anything about my story and have listened to anything in regards to kind of how I got to where I am, you'll know that anxiety has been a massive part of my life since I was very, very young. My first suicide attempt was when I was 11. I was in seventh grade, and even before that, obviously, I was dealing with anxiety. And I mean, I'd say even before the age of 10 is really, if I think back and, of course, my memory's still a little spotty from my younger years, just with the amount of trauma that I've experienced and my brain just getting rid of a lot of those memories. However, many of those have also come back, and it's just something that I've dealt with for a very, very long time, and it's certainly the lowest now than it's ever been, and also looks really different than it ever has been. And I also want to talk about that. And, I was also I've been on just about every medication that is out there for anxiety. I saw a psychiatrist for many, 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 many years. I was on prescription meds for a decade. I was also in talk therapy for over a decade, and during my younger years while I was on the medication, and I tried a lot of things to fix, to heal, to lessen my anxiety. And for me, it really wasn't until I got into this holistic health space that I started really understanding all of the mechanisms that can really drive anxiety, and also some other things that maybe present as anxiety and are maybe some other things to maybe think about. Not saying it's not anxiety, but maybe some other things to think about, to contemplate, to sit with, to see if this also resonates with you. So I'm going to touch on all of this today, and I'm going to start with the physical body and some things that can absolutely contribute to anxiety from a physical standpoint before I go into trauma and more of the mental, emotional side of things too. Because really, anxiety, when we look at anxiety, we should be looking at all of it, just like anything else. If we look at gut health isn't just about, okay, well, are we eating well, or are we bloated, or are we constipated? It's okay if we have gut issues. Well, if we've got overgrowth issues, well, we need to kill those. But also, like, why and how did those get there in the first place? And if we don't address those questions, the how and why, it's going to come right back. And here's the thing: I'm also not anti-medication. For me, when it came to anxiety meds, and I was on depression and anxiety meds for full reference, and I was on anywhere between 2 to 6 different prescriptions at any given time when I was on these things. And some of them were daily use, some of them were emergency use. And for me, at best, I felt like a zombie. At best. And I know for some people that is not the case. I know for some people they can be really, really valuable tools. And I am not knocking any sort of medication. If you feel like you need, especially temporary support while you're going through something, it's a tool. It among many, many, many other tools that are out there. And I do not want to shame
anti-anxiety meds by any stretch of the imagination, because I do think for many people it can be a very valuable tool. And I do think it should likely be a short-term tool versus a longer-term band-aid. And I also want to share that if you are thinking about going on a medication, go to somebody who specializes in this stuff. Your PCP, your general practitioner, maybe not the best person to prescribe you anti-anxiety meds. That's not their primary focus. That's not what their primary training is. If you can find a good psychiatrist and or a holistic psychiatrist, even better. So, and here's the reason why I say that, because it can be very challenging. I will say, of all the prescription meds that we support people along with their physicians and helping get off, these medications often come, what can come, often come with some pretty significant side effects that are highly uncomfortable. I'll say the brain zaps for most people can be quite significant. The just the withdrawal that your body goes through can be quite significant. I know for me, I could not find a doctor to help me go off. And so I went cold turkey, which please never, 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 ever, ever, never, ever do, because it's really miserable. And there are so many better ways to do this other than just going cold turkey. And I mean, I felt really crazy for a while coming off. And I had the brain zaps and the muscle twitching and, the random body shocks and body pains. And, I felt like elevated inflammation and sleep was weird even weirder than it already was at the time for a while. And once again, I would never want anyone to go through that. And I really, at the very least, if you're on meds and you decide you want to come off, please work with someone to come off, because there are way better ways. Once again, myself, my team, we've helped many, many, many people come off psych meds at this point in time. And there's a lot of different ways to do that. There's a lot of tools and resources to help with that. And please work with a physician. That we also will not do that while someone is not under the care of a physician. It is not safe. I don't think it's ethical. I think it's way out of my scope of practice. And I also know I've really helped a lot of people come off of this, and we have helped a lot of people come off of these meds in a way that these side effects are limited to none. I won't say none for all people, and for some it can be none. At least for everyone that we've worked with, they've been pretty mild. So that, generally speaking, is a huge win in and of itself. It also, I've never taken less than 3 months to come off any of these medications. It's also one at a time. So for a single medication, I've never taken less than 3 months to help someone come off. It's also towards the end of a protocol with me, with our team, with our practice, in which case we know some of these other overarching things I'm going to talk about here have already been addressed. So just keep that in mind, that this is not just like, oh, I just have anxiety. Oh, it's just a brain thing. Oh, it's just a serotonin thing. Oh, it's just a neurotransmitter thing. No, it's not. There's a lot of factors that go into this. And I think there's a ton of misconceptions. I think there's less now. And I still think there's a lot of misconceptions about mental and emotional health, especially anxiety. I know for me, for a long time, and I think a therapist told me this. I can't totally remember who told me this, but I remember someone telling me that, or reading somewhere, because I did do a lot of reading on mental and emotional health when I was young, especially in high school, high school and college, when I was, I mean, really, really, really struggling. And, the messaging that I heard at that time was 50% is genetics. And I knew my mom was on a bunch of meds, and I knew other people in my family were on prescription meds for anxiety and overall mental and emotional health in general. I wasn't quite sure totally where they were landing. And, that's what I heard, is that at least 50% was genetic. And so for me, in my young brain, I defaulted to, oh, well, I'm just going to have to be on meds. This is something I'm just going to struggle with because it runs in my family. We hear this a lot about a lot of things. And I'm here to tell you that while there can be a genetic component, and I say that very lightly, as with most things when I talk about genetics, because genes can turn on and off given the right conditions. And if we give it the right conditions, these things can turn off. And there's also a lot of things that are a lot of learned behaviors and learned lifestyles, learned ways of living that can be massive contributors to anxiety and overall mental and emotional struggles. So please keep that in mind as well. There's another thing I'm going to talk about that can be on the genetic side technically, although it's not really, but I'm going to wait until I kind of get there. So, the first thing that I really think about when it comes to anxiety and I'm going to primarily talk about anxiety, and I also want to mention that most other mental and emotional struggles, depression, and other things like that can really fall into this category. It's also super common for most of us to have both, sometimes at the same time, sometimes alternating between the two. For me, largely, it was almost going back and forth of anxiety and depression. There was a many years where it was really hardcore both, and then it was more anxiety, and then it would be more depression. And as I've continued to heal, really the depression is few and far between. I don't feel like it hits me very often. And when it does, it is largely hormonal driven, especially this year in the past few months. And I would say that is pretty common for a lot of people to kind of alternate between the two. And if you are struggling with both, usually there's one that's we're kind of, I like my wave analogy of, just riding the waves. So, you might have waves of depression and then anxiety and then depression and then anxiety. And sometimes the anxiety will be a little bit worse. And sometimes the depression is a little bit worse. And and there can be a lot of factors, and a lot of these do overlap. And I am going to target anxiety just a little bit more in this conversation. So, the first thing I want to talk about is toxin load. So, when we think about toxin load, so we're all exposed to toxins in our day-to-day life. Everyone, unless you live in the middle of nowhere, grow all your own food and do all of your own stuff and make most of your things, the level of toxin exposure that we're all exposed to is decently high. And some of that is controllable. Some of that's more controllable if you have more financial resources. Some of it's really not controllable, though. And so, really understand that. And this is why we talk about liver and drainage support so much and are place such a big focus on this because there's limited ability to escape this. And if you live in a big city, guess what? Your toxin load is automatically higher, even if you are living a very low tox life. It is hard to escape. I'll say there's also things that, for me, I consider myself living a very low tox life. And there are some things, for me, it is toilet paper. We live in an RV. It is really hard to find unbleached toilet paper that is also very septic safe and safe for RVs and won't destroy the tanks. And is also not sandpaper. So, that is an exception that I make and I choose to make. And I don't foresee myself changing that in the near future. And all of my cleaning products, all of our cooking products that we use, all of the skincare products, anything topical I put on my body, the water that I drink is highly filtered. Could we do a little bit more? We're actually looking into an additional water filtration system for the entirety of the RV because our water is really hard. I also know Arizona. Been in Arizona for a while. We're not going to be staying here forever, but we are going to be staying here for at least several more months. I know uranium is pretty high in Arizona. I've run enough HTMAs where consistently that is always the case here in Arizona. So, we're looking into that and we've been filtering our water the entire time. Is it perfect? Probably not. We could be doing better. And once again, it's some of it's financial, some of it's just like mental and emotional capacity to like think about all of these things. Don't lose aluminum foil, use unbleached parchment paper. All of our cookware is clean and non-toxic, and ceramic, cast iron, stainless steel, things like that. So there's a lot that we can do. I buy organic, especially for the dirty dozen, clean 15, kind of things. Like I really focus on that. And, our meat, sometimes we have limited meat quality availability depending on what grocery store we go to and how far we want to drive that week, especially in the last few months while my fiance Jonathan's been going through chemo. So, there's just like some things that we have a lot of control over and some it's compromises, and that's okay. And that's part of balance in life. And supporting our body's natural ability to get that stuff out goes a really long way. I'll say, if we think about two of the there's really three categories that we put toxin load in: heavy metals, mold, mycotoxins, and then environmental toxins. A lot of the environmental toxins we do not have a lot of control over. Once again, unless you're growing a lot of your own food and not using chemicals on it, it can be challenging. Even organic stuff, depends on who's growing it and what they're using. Some of it technically can be considered like not the most non-toxic. They're fine according to our government standards. And if you go to like Europe, some of these things that we still use are not okay over there, which many people will notice difference in food quality over in a place such as Europe. So that is a really big thing. Once again, there's not always a lot of control over that. Heavy metals, we do have some control over, some not. Personal care products are a big one, especially deodorant for women. That's a really common one to have aluminum in it, really common to have aluminum toxicity. Aluminum foil, obviously not great. There are great alternatives. Unbleached parchment paper is my absolute go-to. Can you use it absolutely 100% the same? Not 100%, and it can go a really long way, and you can do almost everything with parchment paper, unbleached parchment paper, and that can go a long way. Sneaky one here. If you are on allergy medication, specifically Zyrtec is the most common one that I'm aware of. So generic Zyrtec, almost all generic forms of Zyrtec have aluminum in them. It is not uncommon for especially certain generic brands of medications, over the counter and prescription, to have things like aluminum in them. You can always double check your ingredient list and see if that is the case. In which case, maybe you can switch that, maybe you can't. And so once again, it's one of those things like, what do you have control over? And let's control our controllables and let go of some of the control over things that we do not have control over, because that can be another factor of anxiety. And I'm going to get there when I talk about mental and emotional health. So toxin load's a really big one. Couple other things that when it comes to toxin load that I think a lot of people don't understand. So it's our body has these natural processes to get this stuff out. However, if our body's not in the best place to get this stuff out for a variety of reasons, whether it's the level of exposure, it might be maybe you have some other stuff going on. Maybe you haven't been taking care of yourself great, and there's some other stuff. Maybe you had surgery. By the way, surgery is another really big one. General anesthesia is very high in heavy metals. If you ever get scans that have contrast, like a CT with contrast, MRI with contrast, PET scan, just because that's top of my brain too here, these things have a lot of heavy metals. And so working on helping the body naturally get this stuff out, whether that's through lifestyle things, whether that's through supplements, there's a lot of options here. So that can go a really long way. I'll say like castor oil packs and sauna are two of my favorite things from a mental and emotional health standpoint that are often very supportive for a lot of people, whether this is toxin load driven and or like hormone driven. That's another really big one I'm going to talk about. So keep that in mind too, that toxin load, pick and choose like where you're going to fight your battles, but the more you can actually support your body's natural ability to get this stuff out, the better. Another big thing that comes into play here. So our stomach acid levels. So many people have low stomach acid levels. If you have acid reflux and or heartburn, it is very common for you to run on more of the lower side of stomach acid levels versus high. Somewhere close to about 90% of cases of people who have acid reflux and heartburn are actually going to be on the low side versus the high side. This is why we love our baking soda test. No, it's not perfect. I'll put a link to that below in our show notes in case you're not familiar with that. But it's a really easy test where you drink a little bit of baking soda mixed in water first thing in the morning, see how long it takes you to burp. Gives us a general idea of where your stomach acid levels might be, in which case we can support your body. Whether it's if it is low and or high, we're able to support the body naturally through that if that is playing a role. So stomach acid, one of the big things that it does is kills pathogens and kills toxins in our stomach before it moves into the rest of our digestive tract. And our stomach is one of the first places that our food goes. We chew it, swallow it, and it pretty much goes right into our stomach. And we want a very acidic environment within our stomach because that helps keep our body safe. It helps kill things that shouldn't go into the rest of our body. It helps break down food in there, especially proteins. So it's really, really important. Stress and nutrient deficiencies are two really big factors that go into low stomach acid. Many, many, many people have a lot of stress and or a lot of nutrient deficiencies, in which case it's super common to end up with some toxin overload issues. Once again, if we can just naturally support our body's ability to do these things, that is ideal. And it's when our defenses go down that many of us have a bigger issue. The other big thing here is mold. And I've done many episodes now on mold, and please go listen to those. We have a mold masterclass where I do a deep dive into all of this, into mast cell work, into histamine work, and mold. That masterclass specifically is $11. Most of our stuff is free. That one is really in depth. So there's a very small exchange rate for this, and hopefully that will entice you to actually watch it instead of just signing up for it and then letting it sit in your inbox like we all do kind of thing. So that's a really good one because I do touch on a lot of the mental and emotional side of how mold impacts our body. But mold impacts our body systemically, including our mental and emotional health. And so significant mental and emotional health struggles are very common in people who have mold illness and mold toxicity. This is always from environmental exposure. It is not just from food. It would be incredibly, incredibly challenging to get mold illness and mold toxicity strictly from food. I mean, you'd have to be eating some really moldy food. I mean, high levels of moldy peanuts, high levels of moldy coffee, like straight up moldy food in order to get that, which I don't know I've never seen a single case of that. It's always been environmental. Once again, current, previous, home, work, school, someplace you spend a lot of time in. All of these are possibilities here. Another big piece of the toxin load side of things, so there's really two. One, before I dive into the gut, I'm going to dive into the gut here, but it feeds gut overgrowth issues, which can then exacerbate mental and emotional health struggles, can impact production of neurotransmitters, serotonin, epinephrine, norepinephrine, dopamine, among others. And the thing is, a lot of that stuff is made in our gut and has to be transported into our brain. There can also be transportation issues that happen with that. I'm also going to touch on that too here in just a moment, and a big factor that goes into that and how many people are doing ourselves a disservice with this. But it also impacts our actual brain. And mold in particular can cause brain inflammation, neural inflammation, can cause fluid buildup. This is actually really common in a lot of the complex cases that I see where we have a lot of fluid in their brain, and this will often typically present as cognitive issues, mental and emotional health struggles, but really then it starts impacting the eyes, and we'll see decline in vision, some blurred vision. Maybe someone was already wearing glasses, but all of a sudden their eyesight just seems to get a lot worse. Maybe it's just like eye struggles, a lot of pain. Maybe your eyes get tired really quickly. Maybe there's extra light sensitivity from your eyes. Those all can be signs of mold in your body, especially mold that has gotten into your brain. So there are really mold and heavy metals are two toxins that can travel across our blood-brain barrier. That means that not only can these toxins go throughout our entire body, but they can also then travel up into our brain and wreak havoc within our brain itself, which you're going to have mental and emotional health struggles. You're going to have likely anxiety and or depression at the least if you've got toxin issues within your brain. By the way, a lot of adults who are diagnosed, who we have seen diagnosed as adults with ADD or ADHD, often it is a toxin overload issue. And they don't actually have this. While once again, I do believe ADD and ADHD are real things and disorders that can exist. I think a lot of people are misdiagnosed, especially adults can be misdiagnosed because it's really toxin load within our brain, among other things going on within our body. And when we start to get that stuff out of our body and our brain, we see that all of those symptoms dissipate, sometimes 100%. So I think that's important to understand too. So these things can present as anxiety, and oftentimes we're coupled with some other things here too that go along with this. But that's a really big deal. The other thing is if you have a history of constipation, you have toxin overload issues because stool is one of the primary ways our body gets toxins out. It's not the only way, and it is a big way. And I know for me, even if I look back at my labs, my blood work labs from my early 20s, where once again, I had a long history of constipation. I started being constipated really, really young. I was hospitalized in high school for constipation issues. Literally, I was so backed up. It was it was so painful. I was in excruciating pain. They had to give me morphine because of the amount of pain that I was experiencing because I was so backed up from all of this. And of course, mentally and emotionally, I was struggling even harder because of that too. So that's a very real thing, a really big deal. Here's the other thing. If you have a history of sleep issues and you're not sleeping very much and or your quality of sleep is not great, which a lot of people are falling into this category. Once again, I fell into this category. I had chronic insomnia for most of my life. It's really only very, very, very resolved within the last year or so as I've continued to dig deeper. And my sleep has gotten much better over the years, and it's gotten really good over the last year or so. So keep in mind that's a big deal too, because when we sleep, our brain naturally drains. Our organs go through different, and if you look at Chinese medicine, there's actually a clock that it looks at of different times where your body's restoring, cleansing, detoxifying, supporting different organs within our body. And our brain's a big one. And if we're not getting good quality sleep, our brain is not draining and restoring itself, doing it once again. This is something that just naturally happens and is supposed to happen. And if our brain's not doing that, well, we can pretty easily end up with toxin overload issues within our brain because our brain's not draining itself overnight and going through this natural healing process that it's really designed, it's supposed to go through. And that can play a big role in and of itself. So, when we look at clients, when they first come in, some big things that we always look at, regardless of bigger root causes, bowel movements is a non-negotiable. Where if someone's not having full, complete bowel movements every single day, that is a huge priority for us. If someone has low stomach acid and or blood sugar dysregulations, this is a huge priority for us. And we're typically going to start addressing that through nutrition versus supplementation. We want someone to start supporting their natural drainage pathways, whether that's through supplements and or just lifestyle things, whether that's castor oil packs, dry brushing, rebounding, sauna, castor oil packs. Can't remember if I said that already. Coffee enemas, whatever it may be, we want to support the body's natural drainage pathways. Sleep is another really big one. Sleep and bowel movements are two of the things that we will symptom manage right off the bat if someone's really struggling with one or both of those. Because we know how fundamentally important both of those things are for our overarching health and well-being. So we need to make sure those are all in a really good spot. Here's the other thing that can happen when we think about toxin load issues. So when we think about toxin load issues, some of the big markers that we look at is cholesterol. And poor little cholesterol gets such a bad rap. And it's so important for our body. So if someone comes in with high cholesterol, the big things that we're looking at, and I'm talking the standard cholesterol panel, total cholesterol, LDL, HDL, triglycerides, VDL. You'll get some ratios in there too, oftentimes. So this is the standard panel that most of Western medicine is running. This is the one we most often see. And if we see a overarching high pattern and or some weird patterns going on, toxin load and gut overgrowths are the two first things that we're going to be thinking about and looking at. Certainly, we will look at metabolic health and nutrition and things like that. And with our clientele specifically, they're coming in with chronic illness issues. And we know that oftentimes one or both of those are often playing a role here and will cause some weird things to happen with cholesterol. Because cholesterol is actually a really important thing. And two of its main jobs, one, overarching job, it's a carrier unit. Cholesterol is a carrier unit. And if we look at actual cardiovascular health and heart attack risk and heart episode risk, that standard panel is actually pretty garbage when it comes to looking at actual lipoprotein health within our blood vessels and our heart health and a deeper look. That's why if someone does have, let's say a long family history of heart episodes, heart attacks, heart disease, different things like that, we're probably going to recommend at some point they run an NMR lipo profile. And this with LP little a. The LP little a is the only true genetic marker for if someone has issues, a family history, and genetic predisposition to trouble breaking down saturated fats. Most people don't fall into that category. And yeah, some people absolutely do. A lot of people with family history of high cholesterol, it is not from eating too much cholesterol. It's from poor metabolic health, which can largely be nutritional driven and lifestyle driven. Also, this whole conception of our total cholesterol should be under 200. I have no idea where they got that from. By the way, if you look at research and studies and previous results, it used to be 300, which I think is far more appropriate for most people. Quote unquote high cholesterol, not always necessarily a bad thing. Oftentimes it's a warning sign or the way Western medicine looks at cholesterol, this is one of the few things where in functional medicine, we actually have bigger ranges for cholesterol oftentimes. Where someone's LDL is, 100, 110, and they're in their 40s, and especially if they're female, that's great. Like, awesome. We obviously want to look at the whole picture altogether. But we need enough cholesterol. Women need more cholesterol, and I'm going to tell you why in just a moment. And as we age, our cholesterol should also increase just naturally. That's what is supposed to happen during pregnancy. Our cholesterol is supposed to increase. So all of these things are supposed to happen. And Western medicine doesn't always share that information or may not be aware of this. So cholesterol has two main jobs. It does a bunch of other things, but two main jobs, especially in relation to what we're talking about. It transports hormones, especially sex hormones, women, especially menstruating women and perimenopausal women. Let's think about that. And it transports neurotransmitters. So if our cholesterol is wonky, we might be having trouble transporting that. I'll also say that Western medicine typically does not flag low cholesterol. And this is actually a huge red flag. If you are not producing enough cholesterol or we've had many people fall into this category of they've been on statins for high cholesterol to help bring their cholesterol down. They've worked with us. They've made a lot of shifts, a lot of changes, nutrition, lifestyle. We've addressed bigger root causes going on in their body. And their cholesterol drops significantly. And now they're technically kind of low, especially once again, some of this depends on age and gender because there are real biological factors that our cholesterol should be higher. And it's highly beneficial for us, our cholesterol to be a little bit higher, especially as we age. but they've experienced increase in anxiety as we go. And it's because their cholesterol's naturally come down and their body stabilized, inflammation, their gut, their toxin, like all of these things have balanced out. And then all of a sudden they have anxiety. And it's because they're not producing enough cholesterol because they're on a statin. And, we always mention to them, like, hey, talk to your doctor about maybe think about reducing your dosage and or coming off depending on what might be more appropriate for you. And we'll often send research showing the impact of low cholesterol. We have a really good study that we just have saved on one of our files that we'll often share with clients about the impact, especially the mental and emotional impact of low cholesterol and how that someone will often end up with higher levels of anxiety, high to higher levels of anxiety, if their cholesterol is too low. And just weaning down, even sometimes just a little bit on their statin, man, that can go a long way. They're like, oh, my anxiety's all gone. And that was the only reason is because their body was no longer producing enough cholesterol and they didn't have enough capacity to transport these neurotransmitters to make sure their mental and emotional health, that their brain had enough of these neurotransmitters and it was presenting as anxiety for them. So that can be a thing. So that plays a really big role here. So toxin load, really big deal. We'll also put sleep and all these other things in here as well. I'll often share just, I actually think I might just break this episode into two because I spent 35 minutes talking just about introducing this and then talking about toxin load here. But nutrient deficiencies also go a long way. And there's a lot of reasons for nutrient deficiencies. We need to look at, are we ingesting, eating enough of these nutrients? 2, are we able to properly digest all of these nutrients? And then are we able to properly absorb the nutrients and use them? And there can be a lot of different factors that contribute to issues in one or all of those areas. But nutrient deficiencies, this is one of the reasons why, if someone comes in with a lot of anxiety and or depression, we'll say, one of the first tests, obviously we're going to look at blood work first. If someone comes in and they have pretty extreme anxiety, especially, likely we're going to run an organic acids test from Mosaic Diagnostics. And I know we talk about this test a lot when it comes to mold. And yes, it's going to look at mold. And it looks at a lot of other things for us because so many things factor into our mental and emotional health and levels of anxiety. And so if we look at gut health, gut overgrowth, so the organic acid test is going to look specifically at yeast and fungal markers. It's going to look at bacterial markers, SIBO style markers, and other bacterial markers. It's going to look at oxalate health. It's going to look at mitochondrial health. It's going to look at our ability to break down fats and use those for fuel. We're also going to get a direct look at neurotransmitters, production and pathways. Really big deal here, shows us a lot of information. And there's a whole section on nutrient deficiencies. There's also a whole section on detox pathways and other amino acid metabolites, which can show us issues with gut health, digestion, different things like that. But nutrient deficiencies go a really long way. And I'll say one of the most common that we see in our practice with people with very high levels of anxiety is low B6. And I'm not saying go supplement with B6 because typically that's not going to cut it in and of itself. Sometimes that can help. For others, not so much. But B6 plays a really big role specifically with serotonin. And if you have low B6, the chances that you have low serotonin, it's going to be pretty high. Now, B vitamins in general are really important when it comes to mental and emotional health. This is also not hey, just go supplement with a bunch of B vitamins because also there can be some not good side effects for that too. I'm not a big fan of a B complex, largely because we also do work with mostly women. A lot of women also have a lot of skin issues, and B complexes can trigger skin issues, specifically acne breakouts. I know for me, I've tried 4 or 5 different B complexes. I haven't tried one recently because I'm just not a big fan anymore. But in the past, I had tried several different brands, and I always ended up with skin issues. And that's a very common reaction. And I also didn't need them. Once again, if I look back at lab work and other testing that was done for myself, no, I really didn't need that. I was just low in a handful of different B vitamins, and it would have been more beneficial for me to be a little bit more targeted in my approach. I'll say if we see someone come in with a lot of nutrient deficiencies into our practice, one of the first things we'll often recommend is a multivitamin. And with people with a lot of nutrient deficiencies, assuming their iron is in a good spot, and once again, we're looking at iron saturation, TIBC, serum iron, just looking at ferritin is garbage, just looking at the CBC is garbage. We need to look at more pieces to get an actual true picture of what is going on. So when we look at this, we'll often see a lot of nutrient deficiencies. And if we do see that, assuming once again, someone's iron is in a good spot, we're often going to recommend a prenatal multivitamin. Male, female, doesn't really matter to us because it's not specifically helping you get pregnant. It's going to boost some of your nutrients, especially a lot of these important B vitamins. And that's really why we like the prenatal multivitamin. I've gone on and off of prenatal over many, many years, and I just base it on my lab work. If I feel like if I look at my labs and I'm coming up with a few more nutrient deficiencies that I don't love, probably going to go back on a multivitamin for a few months and then transfer off and maybe run another test or two in another few months and see where I am. And, that for me this year, I by and large, except for my zinc and copper, look pretty good. So my B vitamins look really good. A lot of my other nutrients look pretty good. And my magnesium's still a little bit low, but I also expected that given just the amount of stress I've been under this year. So I stayed on a regular multivitamin. I also think a multivitamin is a really good idea for most people. Now, not all multivitamins are created equal. The prenatal that we really like, and I'll put a link to our full script and I'll put the name of this in the show notes here too, is called Prenatal Essentials from Seeking Health. And a few reasons why we really like this one. One, it is 2 capsules a day. A lot of these more holistic functional medicine multivitamins are like 6 to 8 capsules a day. And that's a lot. It adds up. It's a lot of pills to take just for a multivitamin. This one's 2, which is very reasonable, very doable. We'll often split it up, one at breakfast, one at lunch. For people who maybe have a harder time, they will do 2 at breakfast. But sometimes that alone, just increasing nutrients and nutrient absorption, because obviously the forms of nutrients in that one, since we're using it, are very good quality. They're methylated B vitamins, which most people do better with. And we can see an improvement in mental and emotional health just from a multivitamin, just because we're helping support proper nutrient absorption. So that's a really big deal. And we do get a good idea of a variety of nutrients in that organic acids test. Once again, one of the big reasons why we really, really like that test, because it shows us mold and heavy metals and all these other things, including nutrients. So sometimes just supporting the nutrients and the level of nutrients that our body needs, that can go a long way. Same thing with iron issues. And I'll say iron issues overall because we do see low iron, and I'm talking true low iron. We're really looking at iron saturation, TIBC, the CBC, and we're looking at a few other nutrients here. So we're looking at that, in which case we're going to recommend something that's going to help boost that. Not only iron, but also all of the cofactors needed to absorb iron. There's also, an organ blend is a great option for a lot of people with iron issues, iron absorption issues. And we also need to dig a little bit deeper into that. I'm like trying to figure out how deep I want to go into it, and I don't want to go that deep. So, some sort of organ complex, maybe we'll use liver, maybe we'll use spleen, maybe we'll use complex. It just kind of depends on the person and what their labs are showing us. That can be a big thing. That can be very supportive of anxiety and lowering that anxiety. On the opposite end, we actually do find a decent amount of people with iron oversaturation, which once again, many people aren't talking about unless it's crazy and you potentially have hemochromatosis, which case obviously you need to go see a hematologist and rule that in or out and figure out a solution for you. But even minor iron overload, which once again, I've been battling this for many, many years because I was hurt by a practitioner who didn't know what she was talking about. That can also contribute to anxiety too. And so I think it's so important that there's an iron oversaturation can present very similar to quote unquote anemia and or like a lack of iron within the cells. And I say within the cells because it's not necessarily within the body, it's really within the cells. So that can play a big role too, in which case maybe we need to go donate blood. And or if you don't want to donate, there are some other protocols that we can do to help lower that iron saturation level. Donating blood is often the easiest and the quickest as a solution here. So that's often a really valuable tool that we can use. But once again, we need to have that information to understand, okay, is this playing a role? If it is, how does our body need to be supported so that we can help lower that anxiety and just help support our body just overall, naturally and overall. So that's a really big deal. So nutrient deficiencies can play a big role here. If we have nutrient deficiencies, we may also have overgrowth issues. If you have gut overgrowth issues, the chances that you have anxiety and or depression is astronomically high. They're stealing your nutrients. They're not supposed to be there. Your body is fighting them. To impacting your body's ability to make neurotransmitters and likely transport them too. So that plays a really big role. And it doesn't really matter whether it's bacteria, yeast, fungus, and or parasites, because that's a big deal really across the board. So oftentimes we'll need to kill those gut overgrowth issues. And once again, stool testing, not a great way to look at this. Blood work is a great starting point to look at this. And here's the thing too that people need to understand. Sometimes we need to do a full killing protocol and rebuilding protocol before we can see the anxiety really start to dissipate. And that's because killing is an important part. We also never jump right into killing. We always start with drainage pathway support work, of course. And I also want to come back to binders here before I wrap up this episode. So we need to kill them, but also that's not very comfortable for our body either. We need to repopulate and help feed all the good stuff and bring all the good stuff back in, heal up our small intestinal lining so food particles aren't just going to our bloodstream, which our immune system doesn't like and our body doesn't like. And that's a huge contributor to food sensitivity. So we need to heal and seal that, in which case we may not see anxiety relief really come in until we're pretty far along in that process. So I think that's a really important thing to understand too, that just because, just taking some oil of oregano, that's probably not just going to help your anxiety. It may be temporarily if you have just like some minor bacterial stuff. If you have anything more than that, yeah, it's probably not going to touch it or it's going to be very, very minor. I'll also say most people don't do parasites well, even in the holistic functional health space. Most people think parasites in the gut. And, here's the thing with parasites, it's not about a specific parasite most often. And if you're interested in the parasite kind of connection here, go back and I've done at least three episodes on parasites now. We also have a free gut health masterclass where we go over this a little bit more. I'll put that in the show notes as well. So parasites are not just localized to the gut. They can be systemically and wreak havoc throughout our entire body. Reproductive tract, lungs, they can be in our heart, they can be in our sinuses. Yes, they can be in our brain too. And, I don't have any science to back this up. And I just have seen it enough firsthand and with just, hundreds of clients at this point in time. Parasites really hold on to traumas and emotions. And oftentimes, one of the biggest side effects we'll see when we do parasite work is an increase in anxiety because our body's getting rid of that stuff. It's bringing it back up to get rid of it. And parasites, when they die, they're releasing toxins into the body. I also truly, deep down in my entire body, believe that they bring up traumas, bring up emotions that are ready to be processed, and also release those when they die. And oftentimes when we see someone going through a more intensive parasite protocol, if they're getting ready to pass something, and we always talk to clients about this, is oftentimes one of the first signs that your body is getting ready to process something out is an increase in anxiety. And so we'll see that increase in anxiety before and then oftentimes we'll see something come out. It's always dead. Sometimes we don't see anything, by the way. Only about 30% of parasites are visible to the eye. Sometimes they're like stuck inside stool and different things. And so you have to take for them. And most people are not on board with that. So I did that for quite some time in my own healing journey because I was super curious. If clients want to do that, I'm totally on board with that. We get stool pictures fairly regularly asking if, hey, is this a parasite? Do you think this is a parasite? And, sometimes we can tell right off the bat. Sometimes we're like, it could be, it might not be, but it could be for sure. But if we're seeing those symptoms come up, and one of the biggest ones is the increase in anxiety, is a telltale sign that your body's getting ready to process out a parasite or a few parasites. And you'll feel better when they come out. So that's a really big deal. And I think that's really important to understand that it's not just about killing, it's about getting the body back into balance. And sometimes that requires some killing, and if we're going to do any killing, then we have to repopulate, feed and fuel all the good stuff, heal and seal the good stuff, like make sure our body's in a really, really good spot. And I also don't see a lot of people doing that piece very, very well. So I think that's gonna where I'm gonna kind of wrap up. Two kind of things that I want to mention here. So binders. So when we talk about toxin load, even when we talk about gut killing, a lot of people will use binders, and we're big fans of binders. But I also want to clarify something. There are selective and non-selective binders, and if you listen to our toxin overload episode, we go into greater detail about this, but non-selective binders are things like charcoal clay, things that are very easily accessible and are very commonly used. These only work in the gut and the digestive system. Toxins are not just specific to our digestive tract. They can be systemically, they can be in our brain, and this is one of the big reasons we love selective binders from Cellcore, because they do work systemically versus just locally. And once again, a lot of times we will see improvement in mental and emotional health using these binders because we're lowering that toxin load. We're also binding up a lot of the bad stuff systemically, not just in the gut. And with these selective binders, they can also enhance nutrient absorption, which once again, that can play a really big role when it comes to anxiety and helping work through anxiety. And that can play a really, really big role. So all of that is really important. I think I'm going to wait until the next episode to give a variety of suggestions and tools. But, I think from this episode specifically, liver support goes a really long way. So any sort of liver detox pathway support work can be really, really, really good for anxiety. Getting good, nourishing food, really important. Protein in particular, super, super important for just our overall health. It's one of two essential nutrients. And it's also really important for the production of stomach acid, which once again, that goes a long way too. Sleep would be the other one. So if there are some kind of like fundamental things from this particular episode, and then I'll go deeper into some other support and supplements. And I have so many tools, so many tools and resources when it comes to this. There's also a whole section I want to talk about that has really helped me, but I'm going to get to that in part 2 here. But anything you can do to support sleep. And this might be, yes, it might be medication. No, it's not my favorite. Bedtime routine. Put down your phone. Stop doom scrolling. That can go a long way. Blue light blocking glasses can go a long way, especially if you want to use some light. Give yourself some time and space to decompress. Nothing stimulating, like at least an hour before bed. And that might be a book, TV, conversations, like anything. Try not to be too hot going to bed. Like don't take a bath right before bed or a hot shower right before bed. For most people, we want to do that like an hour, hour and a half before bed, where it can help relax us and our body needs to cool down before it actually goes to sleep. That's a big piece of sleep. And there's a lot of supplements that can help with that too. For us, we see a lot of people with cortisol dysregulation issues. Cortisol Manager by Integrative Therapeutics, really great tool for that. It's one of the probably most common sleep supporting supplements that we will use within our practice that can help you fall asleep and stay asleep. It's also not going to make you groggy in the morning. The other one that I really like is Hello Ned, which is a full spectrum hemp oil, no THC or below clinical levels of THC, meaning it's legal. You can buy it throughout the entire country. If you are drug tested for your work for cannabis, probably not the best idea, but assuming you aren't, you should be fine. By the way, most people who do drug test for this on their products are coming up negative for anything. And obviously, we're not going to recommend you risk your job to be on this product, but they have a full spectrum hemp oil. They have a daily blend, which can be very supportive for a lot of people. My personal favorite is their sleep blend. I'm a huge fan. I take just 0.5 milliliters nightly, especially right now. And man, it makes such a big difference. It's something I always have on hand. I don't always use it. And right now I'm always using it to make sure I just get good quality sleep and I'm setting myself up for success when it comes to sleep. So that's another really good one. I'll put a link for that as well, so you can have access to that. The cortisol manager by Integrative Therapeutics, you can get on FullScript. I'm already going to put that in the show notes here. You can also get the prenatal essentials from Seeking Health on that too. So you have a variety of options there. I'll say the basics go a long way when it comes to all of this. And for some people, we need to do a little bit more. So thank you for listening. Be sure to stay tuned for part 2, where I'll cover some other pieces that come up when it comes to anxiety here, even at broader. I feel like I'm going a little bit more in depth, and I also feel like this is still pretty broad spectrum when it comes to anxiety here. So thank you for listening. Be sure to stay tuned for part 2. As always, please like, subscribe, follow. Any 5-star reviews really, really, really mean the world to us. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next week.